Well, it is now officially 10 o'clock, which means that it's time to kick off another Vinimark webinar, with today's challenging topic being trying to provide useful insights and trend forecasts in the on-con space for 2025. So over the last 2 years, we've seen a kind of post-COVID sales bounce, and then we've seen a rapid menu shake-up in on-con spaces. Then we've seen wild shifts in consumer behavior, and yet producers are still asking themselves the exact same question, which is, how do I get more of my wines onto more wine lists at the right price? So as hard as it is for the purists among us to admit this, it's really not just about making good wine anymore. It's about placement and partnerships and pricing and packaging and other things that start with P as well. So today we're here to map that terrain, but not in theory, but as is always the case with Vinimark webinars, it's about practice. So we want to know what is selling right now. Where is the space for improvement? Where's the white space? And what does success actually look like for a producer who's trying to break into this channel or grow their existing footprint? And because time is tight and resources are even tighter, today's discussion is really going to be about laser-focused practicality. So if you've got budget for one new product or for one marketing push or just one strategic pivot, how do you make that count? Now, thankfully, we've pulled together a panel that has real-time insights from across the trade spectrum. So we have Jason McAvoy, who's the CEO of Norman Goodfellows, and he's got visibility across premium retail, what moves and what misses. Then we have Linda Dyer, who's the on-consumption manager at Vinimark, and she brings a kind of national vantage point on category trends and the commercial realities of the market right now. Then we have Matt Manning, who's a chef, he's a restaurateur, he's a wine curator. He is waiting to see whether he has won a wine award for one of the top 10 wine lists in the world. And his experience on the floor will tell us what's getting poured, reordered, and enjoyed by customers right at that endpoint. Finally, we have John Koutsoudakas, who is the owner and of Life Grand Cafe, which is one of the strongest operators in the lifestyle dining space, and where wine needs to work both hard and fast. So in this chat, we're going to be looking at market trends with the kind of 12-month data to really pick apart. And then we're going to look at some mistakes to avoid, some smart innovations that perhaps have gained traction, and then strategies that will allow producers to kind of separate wishful thinking from measurable growth. So I thought we'd start off by addressing you, Linda, and given that you deal with a huge number of on-con clients from across the country, you'd be the perfect person to give us a bird's eye view of the recent state of on-con in South Africa. So if you were to look back over the last 12 months of trade across your on-consumption accounts, what have been the most surprising shifts in consumer behavior when it comes to wine? And what should producers be doubling down on as a result?
Hi, Jono. Thanks so much. I'm excited to be part of the panel today. On-con's an interesting, exciting space to work in day to day, as it's constantly changing. Each area is different and each region is also very different. Every owner's approach to their business is different and consumer behavior changes constantly. We also have several different segments within on-con, which determines the on-con trends: hospitality, lodges, hotels, fine dining, social dining, main markets, chains, clubs, and bars. We are constantly having to adapt to new and different needs. There's no cut, copy, and paste approach, unfortunately. Wine lists generally change every 12 months, with the bulk of the listing season overlapping between the first and second quarter. There's an exception of seasonal changes to summer and winter menus, which is basically every 6 months. What we do now, we generally only see results in about 6 months' time. Majority of the volume sits in the 50 to 150 Rand price point. The premium category, which is about 200 Rand plus, although small, is growing. Champagne's also a small category, but it's also growing. Consumers want experience around wine, and the restaurants capable of offering this are reaping the benefits.
Okay, sorry. Carry on. I didn't interrupt you.
So dry rosé came and made a big splash, but since its big debut, it's leveled out. A lot of people understand dry rosé now and know what they like and what they don't like. Many restaurants are reducing their dry rosé listings to half of what they previously offered. Chenin Blanc has been spoken about for a while, but we can definitely see it changing, gaining traction year on year. the hypothesis behind it is because some consumer palates could be changing and moving from the sweeter styles of wine to a fruitier, off-dry style of wine. Riesling and Moscato proves this as it's showing growth, but even though it is with a small base. We have found that restaurants are open to listing more wines by the glass options at different price points to cater for different customers. This is really reflecting the consumer wants to drink a glass of wine that they want to drink. A glass of wine can range anything from 50 to 250 Rand for a glass on a list. And this is just opening the opportunity for people to to drink wine at different price points.
Okay, fascinating. So there are a couple of things you mentioned there. One of them was that Moscato and Riesling are showing a climb. Now, I mean, Moscato being something that is often put into kind of cheap mass-produced wines, and then Riesling being a weird wine nerd geek niche thing. Did I understand you correctly that they are both kind of growing in parity? Because that's very interesting for wine people in general to see Riesling grow. It might be the first time in history.
Yeah, look, definitely. It's like I said, it is a small base, but if we look at the style of the wine, it is sitting in that sweeter category. So it's not quite the dry Sauvignon Blanc or Chardonnay, but it's also not the natural sweets of the world. So our consumer palates are definitely maturing and changing, and we need to embrace that.
And then did you say that dry rosé is down and there's a move towards off-dry? Did I understand you correctly there?
So the dry rosé category when it came onto wine lists into the market, there was a big confusion around it because it was pink. Everybody thought it was sweet, but that was quite a while ago. Everybody knows what dry rosé is now. But because there was quite a big fad, people were listing, 6, 7, 8 dry rosés on their wine list, and that's definitely reduced now. Some people are listing half of that. I think the consumer has decided what they do like and what they don't like, and the restaurateurs are listening to what their customers want.
So would you say rosé as a category is shrinking down, or where some of those dry rosés have shifted off the lists, you're seeing the off-dry rosés replace them?
No, so the off-dry rosés, it is a separate category to the sweet rosés. So the dry rosés, it's still there, but it's not as widely listed. So to try and get your dry rosé on a wine list is not going to be that easy. Like I said, the consumer knows what they like. So where before we had an opportunity to have 5 or 6 listings of a dry rosé on a wine list, or sometimes even more, because the wine lists have been reduced. I mean, yes, definitely after COVID, but I don't like always referring back to COVID. It's been a while. We've moved on from that. But wine lists were reduced, and I think restaurateurs saw the benefit of having less listings to also just make sure that the sales were less scattered for the producers. So if you're going to have three dry rosés listed, it's going to benefit the farms. If you're going to have 6, obviously it's less volume for each of the farms, and the consumer's happy with that.
I suppose just more efficiency all around then. So Jason, would you say that Linda's observations reflect what you've been seeing through Norman Goodfellows? And from your perspective, what sort of wines are growing in demand? What's stagnating? What's bleeding margin? Well, I think you might be muted.
Let's try that again.
There we go. Thank you.
So in our business, which is, sort of a big portion of OnCon across Gauteng, Cape Town, KZN, and Garden Route, we've seen massive growth in bubbly, in MCC, and fairly flat on red and white, and significant growth on rosé, looking at a 12-month year-on-year. So that does mirror what Linda said regarding dry rosé. To be honest, in our system, or our analysis, we don't go sweet or dry. We are not that sophisticated. But yeah, so it very much mirrors, and bear in mind, we don't mind what we sell as long as we're selling. So we have we're neutral. Switzerland.
So you mentioned MCC has grown a lot, and I know Linda hates referring back to COVID, but I feel like some of those effects are really still felt. So in COVID, it was this that was going to hell in a handbasket. Or so. I mean, what do you think is driving this increase in MCC? And to add a little corollary to it, is the growth in champagne or imported wines following that MCC trend?
So, okay, so firstly, post-COVID, which we won't talk about after this, I promise, Linda. We found that people would spend more than they would have previously. So there was an amazing boom, and people would kind of like, who knows how long we got, and they would spoil themselves with better wine, bubbly, whatever it may be. We've certainly seen that slow down where we know over the last 12 months plus, the bubble burst, and it's back into sort of normal spending. And I would say that this year it feels like it's feeling soft. I would say that I'll say the economy is feeling under pressure. Um, the French is still. I would say that local is booming. French is solid, and then also on the French, like a Mondebrignac, which is in a nightclub, anything from in a nightclub, I think it's like 18,000 rand a bottle, was that 3 times markup. That boom is gone. That boom is over. Mondebrignac isn't what it used to be. So like the super premium, that's really pulled back hard. But your Moritz, your Verves, your Laurent Perrier, those are carrying on strong.
Fascinating. And you said
Can I just say on the Cup Classique as well? I think from our side, we've seen a lot of restaurateurs listing more Cup Classique by the glass. So I think it's also making it a lot more approachable for a lot of consumers, where you don't have to commit to a bottle, but you can buy for glass, and that's definitely contributing to the volume.
So just yeah, well, actually, let me move on to
On our side, we don't analyze the sweet versus not sweet, but I would
carry on, Jason. Are you there?
don't look at sweet versus dry, and I wonder if the sort of massive growth in the sweet, am I muted or like a bad signal?
Well, you there? You there
Am I
now?
coming through or not?
Yeah.
Okay, I was saying that in our data, we don't measure between sweets and dry, and I wonder if some of that growth comes from the massive growth in sort of sweet offerings in MCC.
Okay.
I thought Linda might have the answer. No pressure.
Linda, do you have any comment to that? I mean, just while we're talking about it, and mostly because I think understanding how trends rise and fall is quite important, and this bubbly or MCC trend has always been something that has fascinated me, because it's not something that generally South African wine media is talking a lot about, and yet there's a big shift in consumer trends. So I'm wanting to understand, where's this coming from, because that might unlock keys to how to push other segments of the market. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like Jason says, it's difficult to say is it sweet or dry, but the Cup Classique, it's all very relevant in terms of where it's being listed. So we are not seeing too much difference between the sweet side and the dry side, because if we split it down into the segments of the market, it really is determined by what's going where. So it's very much consumer driven as to what their preference is, whether it's sweet or dry.
Okay. So let's move it over to Matt. I mean, obviously, Matt, your perspective might not be as broad or nationwide as Linda or Jason's, but you do sit in the rare position of both developing your own wine products and house wines, and you're also having to give people what they want, just because you're right there in front of you. There's a lot more of a direct kind of exchange. So what lessons would you feel that you've learned over the last after the last 12 months?
Hi, Jono.
Hello.
Yeah, firstly, great to be on the stream. I'm going to apologise for not putting my camera on. I've just been in bed for 48 hours with a terrible fever, so you won't want to see me now. Looking a bit worse for wear. But yeah, I think in terms of what the consumer is really looking for, I think the example of our culture house wine range, we're really sort of aiming to give the consumer very, very good quality wine and excellent value. And so we've over time produced this range of about 12 wines, working with different producers from Chris Allied to Donovan Roll, Paul Kluver, and created a lovely range of wines that can be served in the restaurants that are not going to break the bank, but you're still going to get that quality. Those wines last year we sold about, I think it was about 18,000 bottles within 12 months. And yeah, I mean, we've sort of gradually grown it. We also included a champagne as well, which started last year as well from a grower producer, Montmartre. We're bringing in the second batch of that. It's only a pallet. It's about 700 and something bottles, but still, it shows that the consumer will be happy to pay if they know they're going to get the quality. I mean, our champagne goes for about 1,450 rand a bottle, and it's a grower champagne, and it's also a Premier Cru, so it comes in under, you know, the mass market stuff. And I think if it's quality, then it's going to sell. And even, you know, touching on rosé, we've got a beautiful rosé that's from the Swartland. It's a dry rosé, and we only sell it out of Magnum. And we sell quite a lot of it, as you can imagine.
So, I mean, so for those of you who may not know the context, Matt and Culture are an absolute anomaly. In the middle of COVID, they decided to open a wine bar, and it feels like ever since then they've continued to buck the trend, which is why I think his insights are so fascinating. Also, he's operating at the premium end of the wine chain, which is also, it's a kind of zooming in on that sector of the market. But Matt, you guys are up for a wine award, potentially, you know, one of the top 10 wine lists in the entire world, according to Star Wine List. So my question to you is, can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, sorry. So my question to you is, can you share some of the criteria you have with in order to be in the running for that award? How do they judge your wine list?
Well, first of all, it's not top 10 in the world. I mean, I'd love for that. That'd be amazing. But yeah, so the Star Wine List Awards started, I think, back in 2019. And then they came to South Africa in 2021. And then they did, I think, 3 back-to-back in South Africa. And then if you win the local competition, you're then entered into the international leg, whereby you're competing with the top wine lists from around the world, including Michelin star restaurants and all sorts. This year we entered into the International Open on Star Wine List because they didn't host a South African competition this year. So we entered into the Big Boy League, and I think we entered in 3 categories, and we made it into the finals for the Best by the Glass list. So on the 22nd of April, we'll find out where we rank there. But yeah, it could be interesting to see if a South African wine bar at the bottom of Africa could pick up Best by the Glass. We'll see.
So I think what I'm wanting to understand there is what makes a good by the glass list, in the sense that surely it's not just the most wines by the glass, because that doesn't feel like a great strategy. So can you give us a little more details to like what makes a great by the glass wine list?
Yeah, I think it definitely comes down to variety and choice. I think it's important to have a range of price points, you know, from a 60 Rand glass of rosé up to 1,800 Rand glass of Grand Cru. And I think as well, you've got to take your consumer on a journey. I mean, when people come to Culture, they will sit, you know, the consumer that knows their stuff will sit at the bar, and then they'll just look at our blackboard, and the sommelier will take them on a journey. They'll, you know, give them a couple of glasses, and before you know it, they're ordering a bottle. So I think, yeah, it's definitely needs variety. I think you need to also keep it fresh. We don't keep our list the same for more than, I think every couple of weeks we change it up by the glass. I mean, every week we print a new by the glass list. I mean, maybe some of those wines will change, but at least every couple of weeks we'll revamp the whole thing. It also keeps the sommeliers on their toes as well, because then they're constantly going into the cellar and pulling out a 2013 Ardie Bardenau's red blend, for example, and going, guys, we've got one of these left. Let's put it on by the glass. And I think that's what makes a good by the glass list is for it to be exciting.
So, John, I noticed, sorry, earlier you had your hand up. Can I ask you to comment on the current topic?
Yeah, I was just wanted to give some insight on the champagne MCC question. For us, I think what we've seen is the big change has just been in the price point. Champagnes have climbed so above inflation relative to the MCCs, and as the gap has grown, so in a department we might be selling more volume, but at a lower percentage of overall sales. Just because of that, people are finding the Verve and the Moe prices a little bit less approachable than they used to. So that's just our insight into it.
Oh, thank you. We definitely need to come back to that. So Matt, just to return to you quickly, if you were to, I've asked you what you learned in the last 12 months. Phrasing the question differently, what do you wish that you'd known? Just one insight that you wish you'd known a year ago that you'd done sooner.
That's a good question. Something I've done sooner, probably put more wines on by the glass.
Well, I'm very pleased to hear you say that, because we're gonna talk more about that later. There's some really interesting academic studies coming out from a number of universities on exactly that topic. So we'll definitely get back to it. But before I move on to the rest of the panel, because you are in this fairly interesting little niche of being extremely wine focused, and that enables you to do a lot of great work with less common cultivars like Malbec, Carignan, Verdelho. And so given that your restaurants are kind of associated with your wine bar, sometimes physically and sometimes just by reputation, do you, in your environment, find it easier to sell those niche cultivars, or generally do even your customers stick to the familiar varieties?
Well, I think, the general consumer is always going to be looking for what they know. But to have, a Sauvignon Blanc that is good value for money and great quality, I think it's very important to tick all those boxes for the general consumer. But then at the same time, I think our customers that come to us, whether it be at Grub and Vine or Grub and Vine Norval or Culture, I think that they come not just for the dining experience, but also because they know they're going to get great quality wine at prices that are going to be about 20% less at other places. I mean, we've got an exceptional selection of Ibn Sadi wines that they go for much less than what you'd find on other wine lists. So when people do come, then they tuck in. They'll have a bottle of Columella 05 and then maybe move on to a Jamais Côte Rôtie, which is what happened last week on a Tuesday night, which was pretty good.
So it sounds like if you are sliding to one side of the spectrum, it would be you'd be sliding towards lower margins but higher sales volume. Does that, if restaurateurs are on a spectrum, would I be correct in saying you're closer to the higher volume, lower margin?
Yeah, I think in some respects, yeah, for sure. I mean, there's obviously some things that you can't negotiate on, such as Domaine Romani Conti, but everything else, I think, you got to look at it from a perspective of, do you want to sit with it collecting dust, or do you want to sell it and let people enjoy it? I mean, one of the things that we also make clear is that the price on the bottle is not for people to take away. We do it at those prices so that they can open them and enjoy them in our space, and have the memory of drinking that 05 Columella in culture, instead of them taking it home and putting it in a cellar and letting it collect dust for another 5 years.
So John, I kind of want to level some similar questions that you, I mean, your context is a little different, but in the sense that you're providing a sense of aspiration, there are a lot of similarities. So do Matt's observations and comments mirror yours, or were you seeing things very differently?
I think it's probably a little bit different for us because, as you say, we're a lifestyle brand, and it's an experience. So wine for us is competing against so many other types of liquid to lips. Our trend, there is a slight trend in moving away from the main cultivars, but not probably as big. And I think that would probably just be driven by our sales techniques. From the sounds of it, Matt is much more into the sommelier style sale, where we're much more in a casual style sale. I agree with the comments on price. We've always been, I saw some of the questions like relating to a 300% markup. We've always been sensitive to that. And we do work quite hard with suppliers to bring price down and pass that onto our guests and customers. So, but our trend is changing. And I think there was also Linda's comments, and we've seen it with the, area to area. What we see in Joburg and in the Gauteng area versus what we see in the Cape is quite different, which is quite interesting and makes balancing a wine list and a national brand like ours a little bit more challenging, because how do you provide for different two types of markets?
John, do you mind drilling down a little bit into the kind of one or two of the major differences that you'd see between your Gauteng spaces and your Western Cape spaces with regards to customer demand?
So I think it's also driven by the fact that Western Cape, being based in a tourist hotspot, we have a lot of foreigners, but having said that, we've seen like huge growth in the last year on Pinotage and the red wines, both in Joburg and in the Cape. The difference would come in, say, in like the blends. In blends in the Cape, we're seeing a slight downturn, whereas in Johannesburg, we're seeing a large upturn. And these are not necessarily trends like that we expect. I think it is driven by, Joburg is driven, the blends are driven a lot by the brand and the value that they offer, whereas in the Cape, they seem to be driven by the varietals and people wanting to experience something in particular. So for us, when you make reference to things like Malbec, we struggle with anything that has any foreign influence, or any foreign connotation. People just, in both Joburg and in Cape Town, stay away from it. I think they see us more as a genuine South African experience, and they want to experience South African at us. So
yeah, you mentioned blends a little bit. I just wanted to ask a kind of personal hobby horse question at this point.
Okay.
White blends seem to be notoriously difficult to sell, and some of my favorite wines are white blends, but I'm noticing that more and more they are just disappearing off restaurant wine lists. Are you guys moving in the same direction, or do you find
that would be a similar trend that we're seeing? I mean, I think it's a balance on a wine list as to what do you enjoy, and you want to make sure you want to be able to drink every single bottle that's on there. And there are a lot of beautiful white blends out there that we would like to list, but it isn't a large growth. It's actually contracting. Strangely, we've seen a lot of growth in the in the other brands, in the in your Shannons and that type of varietal, which is something that we saw a few years ago. It dropped off, and it seems to be coming back a little bit now. So white blends, definitely not. Red blends are strong, I think, driven especially by brand. I'm sure Jason would know a lot about that. And that's where we seeing the growth.
John, can I just ask something which maybe straddles your business and wine business, but we regularly, whether it's on-con or off-con or e-commerce, we come across the same things that customers in the last 5 years have all kind of like drawn back to the safe zone of brands that they know. Now, you obviously are building a brand of your own, and you also have to recognize brands because those are the ones you're going to list, or powerful brands, those are the ones you're going to list. So what can a wine producer do to go from not being a brand, just being a label, to suddenly being identified as a safe space, a brand, reliable? Like, are there any kind of top tips from someone who themselves is building their own brand and wanting to reach that same point?
So it's a challenging question. I would say we don't really follow. We've always tried from the beginning to shy away from what have been the really, really popular big brands. I think you'll get some that you can't get away from, and you can't be totally niche and unique. But what we look for is a sense of authenticity, and something that something and someone that we can work with to build a story. We've seen varietals or brands grow within our like portfolio based on the story that we're able to tell and the authenticity that they need to build. And I think, you've mentioned it, wine has to fight for space in our environment. It's got to fight against cocktails. It's got to fight against, all the rest that we offer. But there's an advantage that I think our wine producers have if we stick to local, that they are local. And if we play with that advantage, so it's the relationship between our Cape Town store and a farm, it's the recommendations. They've been to Stellenbosch and then they come back. It's the same with the Joburg stores. If you can build that sense of relationship and almost like partnership and make people feel like they belong to something, then they grow. And that's something that we try to do by working together with a lot of our suppliers. So
it's always fascinating. I never get tired of hearing that message that, again, we've spoken about in previous webinars, sales up into Africa. We've spoken about e-commerce. We've spoken about brand building, and it seems to the more tech savvy we get, the more far-reaching our technology can get, the more cynical consumers become. And actually, what they want is to be able to tangibly connect with the person who's producing that product. So that relationship theme just keeps popping up in any area of sales. And you'd think we'd be, with AI and algorithms and the global market, you'd think we'd be moving in the opposite direction. But the consumer still wants that authentic connection, which I don't think we can repeat that message enough times.
I think you're 100% correct. It's across everything. It's not there's so many tools to make communication easier, but at the end of the day, a simple message from a real person is worth so much more. So it's almost having the opposite effect, that what was easy to communicate with in a digital space, the impact is so much bigger if you can connect directly. And I think that's what it is. It's that authenticity of having once met a winemaker. It's 5 years of sales to a person because they met the winemaker once. That's the kind of thing that we're seeing and experiencing.
Fantastic. So Linda, I wondered if we could continue this topic with talking obviously from a slightly different vantage point, based on your interactions with a whole bunch of restaurateurs across the entire country. We talked about what they list, but I wondered if you're seeing trends with regards to actual price brackets. So, are there some cursed price points that, when crossed, cause these on-con sales to drastically drop off? Or is it that the inverse relationship between price and volume is actually fairly smooth and you can kind of predict where it's going to be based on those two metrics?
Yeah, Jono, look, majority of the volume has always sat in the wine by the glass, and then the wine by the glass pricing is very sensitive because a lot of the guys have a specific price in mind, and the consumer also has a price in mind that they want to pay. If they're selling a glass of wine, a glass of Sauvignon Blanc at 65 Rand a glass, they're kind of wanting to maintain that year on year, and sometimes that means changing from brand to brand because of price increase, and sometimes the brands outprice themselves out of that wine by the glass bracket. The main three categories we know is Sauvignon Blanc, Merlot, and red blends across the board. And having said earlier about the different areas and the regions and the different types of customers, it's not always going to look like that, but from a bird's eye view, that's what it looks like. Wines listed on a wine list between 250 and 350 rand a bottle is generally the kind of sweet spot, because there's more of a chance that the guys are going to buy a second bottle. Anything over that, it's a one bottle sale generally. I wouldn't say, I think also the exercise that we're trying to do, which is increasing availability by the glass, we are trying to manage that volume versus price issue that we have, because sort of like the more affordable the wine is, the more volume we're going to sell, but the more expensive it is, the less volume we're going to sell. But if we can start making sure that we've got different price points available by the glass, we can try and beat that that concept of the more expensive it is, the less we're going to sell. But yeah, I mean, that's it's relative to the outlet that's selling the wines.
Sure. So, Jason, we kind of attacking this question from every side, but Melinda mentioned that in the restaurant, 250 to 350 is a great little bracket, because there's a fairly good chance that there'll be a second bottle purchase. Whereas above that, you committed to a single bottle only. So I wondered if there are wholesale price brackets that deliver the highest volume of restaurant orders for you. So if a restaurateur is wanting to kind of work through you rather than directly into the restaurants, what sort of wholesale, what sort of price points deliver the best wholesale volumes? Is it again just the cheapest?
Yeah, so it was interesting looking at this, because it was only preparing for this webinar that I got into the numbers, and so 58% of our on-con volume would be in the under 100 rand a bottle. But if you think about that, under 100 rand a bottle would be the 200, 250, 300 price point in a restaurant, because it's very low. It would be a 200% markup to a 300% markup, somewhere there. And then what was interesting, so I've got 58% in under 100, in 100 to 150, 20%, 151 to 200, 10%, 200 to 300, 5%, and then surprisingly above 300, 8%. So in the expensive side, we're seeing that to be quite big. So it bucks the trend of cheaper the most, because we would expect it then to be lower than the under 300. And then what's also interesting is if you look at it by value, that 8% above 300 rand is 40% by value.
Can you say that one more time?
So the 8% of volume that is over 300 rand is 40% of value. So 40% by value. That shows the power of luxury, the power of brand, the power of luxury, selling luxury, and how much more money there is in it. Well,
fascinating. And perhaps also tapping into the same thing that's seeing the boost in something like MCC. I mean, as you said, prices are becoming more affordable for local products, but there's also something about that celebration, or that buying something special that in fact elevates that pricier bottle to being a more regular thing, ironically. But those are some fascinating insights. Yeah,
I think John might have more insights on this, because in our business, we've got restaurants and we've got nightclubs, and in nightclubs the champagne scene is huge, and that's it's hardly because it's being drunk by connoisseurs. It's more around who's seeing me drink it, but with I think there's a bit of more price sensitivity out there. And our MCCs are outstanding. The quality of our MCCs, in fact, the quality of our wine in general South Africa is so good, and at the price that you pay for it, it's unbeatable, I believe, anywhere in the world. And maybe John can comment that maybe people are going from having French at lunch to having MCC at lunch, because I mean on a blind tasting, it's quite hard. It's same.
John, do you want to comment further on that?
Yeah, no, I agree wholeheartedly that our MCCs have often been a lot better than some of the more popular champagnes. But I think it's just in the restaurant environment, we're seeing it as it's a price point. You can sell an MCC at 450, 500, 600 rand, whereas to a big branded champagne is now nudging at under 2,000 rand. You're on the cheaper side. within our environment. So it's a matter of, like you said, John, earlier about bottle price. Can I have 2 bottles or 3 bottles of MCC versus 1 champagne? And then what complicates it even more is, can I have a bottle of champagne or a bottle of Hennessy or a top-end tequila? A good quality tequila. That's where, by pushing the price up to that point, has become a much bigger problem, challenge for us. And I think what we're experiencing is exactly what Jason is saying. You're selling the same units or more in MCC, but in a rand value, you've lost a 1,600 rand sale to a 600 rand sale. So the GPs are still there, but it shifts the balance of power.
Totally. So I want to start, sorry, to Jason, a question in this thing. You talked about, this interesting thing where at 8% it boosts up, you've got a huge delivery of revenue. You must get a sense of which brands or which products specifically are going to have success in that retail sense, just by looking at the packaging, forget what's in the bottle. I mean, and we said we talk about price and positioning, but packaging is real. So I just wonder if, when you see a brand, I mean, what always comes to mind is the kind of iconic brand success story, something like Chocolate Block, okay? And it's regardless of whether it tasted like chocolate or what was in the wine. I mean, no one knows. It was the brand that really made it soar. So what is it? Is there an X factor that you look for when you see brands? I mean, obviously you might not be involved specifically in what goes on the shelves, but what are you looking for in those brands that you're like, these are going to soar?
So yeah, I think it's a great question. So Chocolate Block is iconic, and outside of trying to demystify it or figure it out, I mean, I think it was, for me, in my opinion, it's the clean white label and a great name. And a name that is, when you get to sometimes when you get to a restaurant, wine list can be very daunting. A wine list can be, you get there, you're on a first date, you're not on a first, you're with friends or work colleagues, and you pull out the wine list and you want to kind of look like you know what you're doing. So things that come to mind there was, and I speak from experience when I was younger, when you order a Chocolate Block or a Haute Cabria Chardonnay Pinot Noir, you sound like you know what you're talking about. So sometimes the naming and the accessibility of it is very important. And then there's some brands that have when they rebrand or change their labels. And there was one that had about lost. Am I coming through? Is there a problem?
Sorry, I think I cut off there. I thought it was you, but I think it might have been me. Are we
okay?
I'm sorry. I missed the last 20 seconds. I'm so sorry about that.
If only I was that good that I knew where to pick up. So what I was saying was that on a restaurant wine list, it can be quite daunting when you sit down and you open this up and you want to kind of impress the people you're at the table with. And things like Haute Cabria is one of those ones where, when I was young, it was like, it sounds fancy, it sounds like you know what you're talking about, and it was a sure winner. Every time I ordered a white, I would order that because it sounded like I knew what I was talking about. And then you get the big brand stuff. So Chocolate Block would be one, Rupert and Rothschild would be one, where they've developed a brand around wine. And I think that the challenge with wine is there's such a vast offering, and it's quite hard to differentiate yourself within that offering. And the winners aren't always the best quality wine. The winners are often the packaging, the positioning, like Vinimark seriously Old Dirt is a great success story, and the volumes are like a Nike tick. So what I was saying was there's a wine brand that it had a Picasso type label, and I think they were forced to actually remove it. And when that label changed, there was a decline in volume. So packaging is fundamentally important. And you say, so when it comes to us and listing new wines, we will generally want to understand the quality of it. That's important to us. But we won't not list based on packaging or list based on packaging. I mean, on the seriously Old Dirt, when it was launched, it was just Seriously Old Dirt, and then a few years later, it was Seriously Old Dirt by Vinifonte, and I mean that was very clever, and it certainly significantly influenced the growth in that brand.
Yeah, so it's the power of association. Bring you in again. What can you speak to this category in the on-consumption trade right now? Because we talked about dry rosés having to be culled left, right, and center, but are there perhaps have been told, hey, you got to hit this category, and so they've gone out and produced a product that there's even a great wine in the bottle, but there's just too much of it. Can you talk about that point a little bit?
Sorry, was that me, Jono? You're breaking up a little bit.
Yes, sorry.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so back to the most consumed varietals in South Africa, and that's going to be our red lead category, our Sauvignon Blanc and our Merlot. Those are completely oversupplied category. It's the most listed, there's the most options on a wine list in those categories. And that's where everybody wants to play. So it's a very competitive part of a wine list to be on. And I think what Jason was saying now about the am I still on, or is John frozen?
No, I'm here. I'm not sure what's going on.
It's so yeah, I think it's very interesting when he was referring to labels and packaging. I think I have a slightly different opinion on a wine list, because I don't think people often look at a wine list and the picture of the bottle pops into their head. They're looking at the names. So when you're looking at a list of Sauvignon Blanc or Merlot, that's what you want. You referring back to either something that you know is good and you've tasted it before, it's the Old Faithful that you keep going back to, or it's something that you've heard of, or you have some sort of relevance to it. On consumption, most places are not, unless we create an experience to get people to taste different wines. If it's up to a consumer and they don't have a sommelier to also guide them in what they're having, most people are going to put their money where they can trust the wine that they're going to buy. But having said, those three categories are they're just very tough categories to get into, and unfortunately it's not, with the amount of wines that we have in South Africa, the amount of amazing wines that we have in South Africa, making sure that your Sauvignon Blanc is the Sauvignon Blanc by the glass is very competitive, and we need to understand from a supplier point of view, from the brands, what it's going to entail to get your wine listed onto that wine list. What sort of partnership is the restaurateur looking for to get onto that wine list? I think John alluded to it as well, in terms of working with suppliers to get better pricing on the wine lists.
Yeah, can we talk about that partnership thing? Maybe this is a little controversial, but I am surprised at how the margins on wine, 300%. I mean, look, present company excluded, ridiculously high. The reason I never buy wine in a restaurant is because I know what that wine costs in retail, and it just feels like an insult. Restaurants are one of the toughest industries in the world to be in right now, and if you hitting kind of net profit at the end of it all, then kudos to you. So it feels like the system is kind of heavily, I mean, 300% markup on their food, no one would come, right? So when we know that we can increase volume by reducing margins, and Matt has seen that. Balance of power in the relationship between restaurants and producers, it's in between these two parties.
No, John, I don't think we can. I think at the end of the day, it's the restaurateur deciding the pricing. We can recommend the pricing, and we can say this is what we would like to get it listed at. But with it being so vast, between 100 to 200 to 300% markup on wine lists, I think the consumer is very happy to pay, because they're walking into the restaurant for an experience. You're being serviced, you are sitting in a beautiful environment, you've got great cutlery, crockery, everything like that. So a consumer is very willing them to walk into a restaurant and pay for an experience. But like you say, if they know what the cost of the wine is on a retail shelf, they are less likely to buy that off a wine list, knowing that it is marked up so high. But it does then give us the opportunity to sell a lesser known brand at a more affordable price, because they possibly won't know what the retail price is. So it is a very controversial conversation, because there are the partnerships that we have is very vast as well, from discounts to deals to contribution. And every restaurant here is different in terms of what they want. Sometimes they just want to have a partnership where we are there to support them. And I think Vinimark on-con sales team is very supportive. We're in working with our customers, and we're trying to make sure we're giving them the best value that we can. And some restaurateurs are interested in that, and others are looking for more of an investment.
Sure.
Maybe John can
do you
give
think
us a bit more insight in terms of how the calculations are done.
Well, I mean, or maybe in a related question, I also just want to understand what role or what is the function of corkage? Like this thing exists, and there's always debates online over what is right and what is wrong. And some guys have corkage as the price of their cheapest bottle of wine to say, well, if you're going to open a bottle of wine, then at least pay the cheapest price. And others go the exact opposite and say, if you want to drink your wine in my restaurant, in my house that I've prepared for you, then you must pay the most. Maybe, John, maybe you can talk to how do you see the topic of corkage?
It's a difficult one. I know when we opened in Cape Town, it seemed to be like there was a group of people that would move from restaurant to restaurant, knowing that the Cape Liquor Board takes a while, and they would only come to your restaurant whilst they could bring their own wine. I think that what we have to not underestimate is the investment that restaurants put into having a wine list. Especially if you have more than one store, sometimes I look at the quantity and the volume of wine that I have in order to service, and it's quite big. Looking in preparation for today, the stock of wine that I have in a store with champagnes represents about 25 to 28% of my total stock holding. Sales are around 12%, but I have to have a good list. And if I have a good list, I have to cater for the fact that you might want that second bottle. Because if you have a bottle of wine, and coming back to the whole experience of eating in a restaurant and going out, if you have a bottle of wine and you don't have the next one, you actually leave with a sour taste in your mouth. So, all the good can be undone by not being prepared. And I think, that's one of the things. Corkage, if you're bringing at one of our restaurants, if you're going to bring something really, really beautiful and fancy and celebrate your 50th wedding anniversary or your 21st birthday party with a bottle of wine that your dad's kept since you were born, that's one thing. But to come in and just drink a normal piece, it's like, I think it's not the environment. We're selling an experience. All restaurants sell an experience. The wine lists are curated. A lot of work is put into it, and a lot of investment is put into it. And nowadays we have to jump through a lot of legal hoops to keep it going as well. So it's just one of those things.
Yeah.
I would say. So we shy away from corkage.
Sorry, say that again.
I said we shy away from corkage. We try not to do it.
Fair enough. Matt, you wanted to comment a little more on this particular topic?
I think it's an interesting topic. And what I find is that normally 9 times out of 10, the people that want to bring a bottle of wine are usually people that are connoisseurs of wine and will end up buying another bottle anyway. So our rule is if you bring something that's special, you can open it for free as long as I get a glass, and then you need to buy something afterwards.
Fair enough.
Which does seem to work quite well.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, well, I suppose it is a difficult topic. And I think what's important about talking about it now is for producers to be able to understand, and that's why I appreciate what you shared, John, the kind of effort and work that goes on one side, perhaps needs to be better understood by producers, because sometimes they can feel like, oh, no wonder we're not selling wine. You're selling X product for $1 million. So I think it's really important for them to be able to hear the kind of steps and consideration and the experience that's being produced to explain where that margin does go. John, do you mind if I circle back to you again?
No
Just
problem.
because I want to come back to the topic of wine by the glass. And I mean, Matt said earlier that his kind of big learning over the last year was to add, he wished he'd added wine by the glass earlier. And I'd be surprised to know, maybe you can talk for some of your peers or even some of the limitations within your own group. Why is it that the wine by the glass list still, by and large, seems to be kind of mostly cheapest wines only and all very, very safe wines? It's going to be Sauvignon Blanc, maybe Cabernet, maybe Chenin. But outside of that, it's very difficult to find slightly more adventurous wine by the glass lists. And yet, as I mentioned, there's studies from a number of universities saying that wine by the glass gives better customer engagement. It results in not just more transactions, but more upsales, which either another bottle or another glass, and it can appeal to wine connoisseurs and to the casual wine drinkers. So is there a kind of mental block that I'm not aware, still insist, not some, the majority of restaurateurs still insist on glasses, mostly the cheap ones, super safe? Like, what are we missing from the outside?
I can't talk to everyone, but on our experience and our goal has always been to try and offer something in every varietal by the glass. On a more mainstream varietal, we will offer obviously a bigger variety by the glass, and we will tend to stretch the boundaries a little bit. So if it's in the past a Chenin Blanc, we're not going to offer you 180 Rand glass of Chenin Blanc, but we'll offer you an under 100 Rand or under 100 Rand by the glass. We've done a bit of, we've tried recently almost having an entire menu by the glass. So I think for us, there's been a diminishing returns and going too far. I think if you go to the extremes that you're mentioning, where it's just the really, really safe options, I feel like it would be the same. There would be a you'd be losing out. But the basics come down to the risk and how you control it. How do you manage a bottle of wine once it's opened? In a busy environment, how do you control a pourer? Or a preserver. So that becomes a cost factor. How many preservers do I need? We've tried with Vinimark to get preservers working on across expanding our list with some success, but it boils down to that. If something doesn't sell and goes off all the time, then suddenly that 300% markup is wiped out, and it doesn't seem like a lot when you're throwing away half a bottle of wine, effectively. But I do agree with you. I think it does have its place. I think expanding the by the glass offering has a lot of value, but it does, environment dependent. There's a ceiling that we find for our by the glass.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Matt, again, you were saying, it seems you have something to say on the matter as someone who has one of the widest by the glass wine lists in the country.
Yeah, well, I think John also just mentioned about the, the preservation options that are available now. I was just going to add that I think that's come a long way, especially like in the last 5 years. You've got so many options now on preservation units that you can use. We use Coravin. I actually imported an adapter so that I don't have to use those tiny little capsules. And it's actually a 9 kg tank that fits underneath the bar, and it works really well. I mean, those units, they can preserve wine for up to 6 months, and it's very, very rare that it'll actually sit there for 6 months. Obviously, I think there's many things that you can do to keep the stock moving as well, such as doing tastings and adding these wines to your wine pairing. Yeah, I just think it's a great way of allowing the consumer to try something that they've not tried before.
Well, I like that idea of that holistic system going, and maybe it only works where wine is more of a focus, like John's restaurants, but where the wine is open to be don't go according to the plan, there's a secondary use that it can go towards, whether that's going into the ragu or whatever, but it's how you mitigate that risk. And there really is so much more to say on this end of our time. Jason, you had something you wanted to say on the topic. You unmuted?
There we go. That's take two. I speak as a consumer on the topic. Three things. Firstly, on the premium side, if you're looking at ordering a wine that's going to cost you, I don't know, 800 Rand or something like that, and you haven't tried it before, I'd be more inclined to order a glass for 200 and then I can see if I like it and it's worth it. I love it when you go to when you get wine by the glass on offer that is not just entry level. I love being able to, then explore a wine list through a meal. And also when my wife and I go out, it's like one bottle's 2 glasses each, and that's probably the responsible quantity. 2 bottles feels too much. And if you are ordering wine by the glass, it kind of flows. And I think you'll, as a restaurant owner, I think you'll end up selling more wine as a result of that, because it doesn't come to an end and it's a big decision to get another bottle.
So what I'm always fascinated by, because I've seen it once or twice, but it enough, and that is that in-between option of the carafe price. So what I see currently is roughly a single glass is usually priced at roughly purchase price for the bottle. Okay, that seems to be how a lot of people manage this stuff. There's some restaurants who do a buy the 2 glass or buy the carafe, which is perhaps a 300 ml pouring, and that list is wider than the buy the glass list purely because it makes is this something that can grow, or is there a pitfall that I'm missing?
Who was the question aimed at? Me.
Sorry. I mean, yeah, just to continue the conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose.
So I mean, for me, a carafe probably speaks more to getting value than, I don't know. So for myself, I look for a carafe isn't appealing to me. Wine by the glass is appealing. I suppose the carafe, if it's myself and my wife, and it's like 2 more glasses, that would work for me. But I'd also want it to be decent wine. And then I think the challenge does come in, and John mentioned it, you can't be throwing wine away. And if you aren't preserving the stuff properly, you're going to be serving wine that's not servable. And I've been in places before where they bring a glass and you send it away because it hasn't been preserved. And you don't want to be serving like suboptimal wine or oxidized wine.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Linda, I'm going to get to you 1 second. I know you want to comment on this, but Jason, maybe just the last question for you. If could distill all your learnings, over the last year or so into one piece of advice for producers looking to improve their on contraction in the next 3 months, what would that piece of advice be to them?
So that's the $1 million question, isn't it?
Potentially, yeah.
So I think that it would be a targeted approach. So to not spread yourself thin and try and be listed everywhere, it would be to target where you want to be listed, and then put all your effort and energy into a targeted base. It would be to partner with a venue. So if it would be to be for a Mother's Day or a Father's Day or something like that, where you are giving them some value and getting more liquid to lips, and then if you can find a way to do memorable moments, or I mean, John mentioned it. You meet a winemaker and you buy the wine for 5 years because you met the winemaker, and you see people do that quite cleverly in the spirit brands, where at the Capital 15 on Orange, there's like I forget which brands it was, but 4 different spirit brands, and they made an Instagrammable moment. I mean, like, that's clever, because that is like every photograph taken there is shared with all of their people, and that's like that really cleverly builds a brand. And I've never seen that that I can recall with wine, and I think there's a great opportunity there in terms of building your name among consumers.
Yeah, which comes back to, how perhaps one of the little steps you can take to move from being a wine label to being a wine brand is just being more familiar.
And I'll just maybe have one more
Had a
thing to
comment
say
to
on the
make.
matter, which would be,
Yeah.
I think that the guys who focus on what they do and what they do well, as opposed to having 12 different varietals and trying to have every sort of niche in the market covered, I think that's a better approach. I think having two ranges, having a sort of entry and a premium, I think makes sense, but not 3 or 4 or 5 ranges, and then to focus on what you're good at, but be it based on the climate and the region you grow or whatever it may be, but not to have these like all 10 varietals that you've got. I think is lacking focus.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for that advice. Linda, can we come back to your comment on the topic?
John, I was just going to comment on the carafes. I think the pricing of the carafes, the 300 mils, in my experience, it's always been so it's more of a shareable portion. So you can order one carafe and you could share it between 2 or 3 people if you wanted, instead of ordering a glass. So I also don't think I think Jason also said it, is that what's going into the carafe isn't always the best quality. It's usually, the most affordable. So I personally am not a fan of carafes, but there's definitely a time and a place for it.
Yeah. I suppose I'm just trying to think of ways, again, to make both parties win. You move higher volumes of wine, you mitigate the risk of wasted wine, you charge more, so there's more margin built in. It just seems like the glass price and then an entire bottle price, that's quite a big jump from one to the next. And I'm just wondering if anyone has put any work into trying to bridge the gap between those 2 points, but maybe it's not necessary. Yeah. So Linda, maybe, as we draw to a close, with the kind of volume of data and client conversations that you handle, you really do get to look at things from a rare vantage point. So if a producer came to you tomorrow and said, where should I focus my energy to get listed and then stay listed? Like, what specific action would you tell them to take?
So I promise Jason and I didn't compare notes, but I'm literally almost going to say exactly what he said.
Right.
I would say don't try and be everything to everybody. Focus on what your strengths are. Know what you're making well and what you're selling well. Know the type of the outlet that you're targeting. Also understand their business and what the expectation is with regards to partnership. But most important, know the consumer you're targeting. So it's not always just the outlet, but it's also the consumer. Who's going to buy that wine off the wine list? Getting the wine listed is only half the victory on a wine list. Once it's there, it's there. There has to be a strategic plan to sell it off the list. And then also, if you're going into those highly competitive sections, understand what your competition is doing. Because it is a highly competitive market. So if you do want your Sauvignon Blanc on that wine list by the glass, I think you can't just say, I want to John, I want my Sauvignon Blanc on your wine list. He's going to say, well, I've already got this many. What makes yours so special? And I've already got this relationship with these guys, and I'm already we've already got a partnership going. So I think it's very important to understand who you're selling to, and what their requirements are. We also don't want to go and have your Sauvignon Blanc as the most expensive Sauvignon Blanc on a wine list, when if you actually took the time to understand the business, you would realize that they don't sell anything over 200 Rand, and your wine's sitting there at 400 Rand. So you got it on the list, but it's not going to sell. So it really is just knowing your customer and having a strategic plan.
Yeah, fantastic. So, John, maybe I can give you the most, because one of the last thing I want from this webinar is for producers to come away going, okay, I need good quality, good price, stable supply. Like that's almost like common sense ground zero. But to say great quality, great price, stable supply, what is the next attribute that you would want from a wine producer who's going to partner with you to make your wine lists better?
A great experience, and a great story. I think, we live in a world where visual is such an important aspect, and the story that we tell about things is such an important aspect. Going to a restaurant is no longer only about good food. It's about the interior, the ambience, the experience, the service. One of the things that we try to do as a group is impart that on our staff and on our servers, and as one of our core things is that we're selling an experience. Price is relative to how you feel at the end of it. Wine it's so many of the things that we talk about are subjective. So for us, a partner, it's everything. It's Jason's comment. We've never bought a wine because of a label, but we have not listed a wine because of a label, or we have not listed a wine because of a story. But will we list a great story and a great wine but if the product inside is not up to standard? Absolutely not. So for us, that's one of the things. We want someone who can help build, just add to what we are trying to do. I suppose it's an irritating answer because it's not a very tangible answer. It's not a.
Yeah, I think it's a great.
It's not mathematical, but it is. It's got to complement your brand positioning. The label comes into it from a brand positioning perspective. Something that might be playful can work in one place, but not in another. There's no right or wrong, only for what we perceive correct for where we are.
But it does echo what Linda was saying, which is understand the restaurant, right? And I think so. So it doesn't need to be a mathematical answer. I think the answer is really, really important.
Right.
Entire panel, we do have a question from the Sommelier Association. Will perhaps be able to answer this most effectively. But how important is the role of the sommelier when it comes or even just moving stock, especially in Gauteng? Do you think there's the tasting room experience that people have in Cape Town within the restaurant space? I'm not sure if anyone.
I think you were breaking up. Jono, who was that for? For Matt?
Oh, no, so I think restaurateurs in general, but John, I mean, you are operating up in Gauteng. It's a casual environment, but if the waiter can sell, it's a lot more effective. So I'm wondering to what level, perhaps to word the question differently, can training the staff with regards to their wine knowledge
it's a
higher level of sales, perhaps?
It is. It does have a massive impact. It drives enthusiasm, and then I think that comes in that partnership level. It's how the story that you tell the staff is they then convey that with a level of energy. You can have a formal training, and you can talk above a person's head, but you can sell them an emotion. And if you're able to sell an emotion about a wine, you can turn a person into or convince them to try that out. So staff training is huge. It's about creating confidence. Our environments, especially because even we're in our more upmarket Mabu, we've played with sommeliers in the Life Grand Cafe. It's a quick, casual environment. It's an experience. You're dealing with other people who know what they want in Johannesburg, or you're dealing with people who have no idea. They've just landed in South Africa for their first holiday down in the Cape, and they want to try something South African. But how you convince them, it's about the passion. So training is huge.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, John. Linda, last comments from you?
Yeah, just also on the comment of the sommeliers, I think it's imperative that we partner with the sommeliers, and I think definitely for for the restaurants that are able to have a sommelier there, it's really great to be able to sell some of the wines that are lesser known to the consumer. There is that trust element, and just the waiters. They are essentially extensions of us. We can't be at every table recommending a wine for every meal. So waiters are a huge priority to make sure that they understand the wines that they are selling. So yeah, I'm a huge supporter of making sure that we do the training and we are partnering with the guys on the ground.
I'm always fascinated by two anecdotes that I've heard from a number of different restaurateurs, and that is, one, there's a wine estate that plays music to their vines, and when a waiter is told that story, which is in one sense it could, because it could be science-based, but it doesn't matter. When the waiter tells that story, 8 out of 10 times you'll make a sale knowing that the wine had Baroque music played to it. And another story is there's a maker who only plays Bruce Springsteen in the cellar when the wines are fermenting, not to be played. And again, when that story is told, all of a sudden people are like, I don't even care whether, I don't even drink wine. I just want to taste that, the boss being little yeast guys, so that when they're doing their work, they feel extra energy. But those two stories are, yet for whatever reason, those are what seem to have this massive upswing in the sale of producers to think a little broader, coming back to the thing about story and experience that. So yeah, and Jason, do you have a comment on that? I think you're muted again.
There we go. So I think that there's nothing. A great story is very important, but it must be authentic. So you don't want it to be a story made up in around a boardroom marketing table because it's going to sell your wine. It should be something that is authentic. I think the authenticity, to John's point, is so important in this day and age. And so a great story, but like not purely on a marketing spin. Something with authenticity behind it.
Absolutely.
I think you're right. Something with
So we are now
got to back it up. I'm saying Jason's correct. It needs to have substance. People also can see through anything that's not true. And it comes down to your values. So as long as it's valid and it's authentic and real, then you'll do well with it.
So it's now 11:17. So we are 17 minutes over time. But what I'm going to sum up what we've been talking about, some of the highlights. And then if I've missed anything, that would be the chance for any one of you guys to say, hey, actually, what I thought was really important is this, and you haven't mentioned it. And then we will be done for the day. So if we go all the way back to the beginning, we promised to talk about prices and partnership and positioning and other things and packaging. And Linda started out by saying, look, like price points are interesting, but things like rosé are at least dry rosé are having a little bit of a low point right now. Later on, John mentioned that white blends are particularly tricky. So it's always good to at least know that there are these little gaps that are perhaps that the soil is far harder if you want to plow there than other areas. But what Linda almost immediately zoomed in on was price wines by the glass, and that's been echoed again and again, that wine by the glass is going to generate increased volumes, increased profitability, and the technology, as Matt talked about, to preserve those wines is better than it's ever been, and in fact more cost effective than it's ever been. So as a wine producer listening to this, or restaurateur, you both need to know that the possibilities are there, and it might be that one partner is just unaware of the fact that this technology exists to reduce risk, which of course will increase things like wider wine by the glass lists, which, as we know, ticks over into more engagement for the drinking market. And we had an interesting little touch when we break down this by pricing. Jason had some fascinating stats saying things like 58% of the sales was of wine bottles under 100 Rand, which would translate to about 2 slowly slid off from there. But in the kind of free through something like Norman Goodfellas at 300 Rand a bottle, there's a little bump, a little explosion of celebration and joy, if you like. Percent of sales for them, but 40% of revenue in that sector, which that popped up again and again. And that was that MCC seems to be seeing a little bit of a resurgence. Then we talk, or I think if there's a metaphor I want you guys to remember today, perhaps it's a cowboy. But also a cowboy is always straddling his horse with one foot in each camp. And listening to Matt talk about what he did, it was always about and a known brand, but then perhaps developing the product himself and adding, reducing margins, but increasing options for the consumer. And so it's always a give and take. You do your numbers as a wine producer, you need to be willing to give a little bit, to take a risk, ground, to grow your listing, to grow your market footprint. So I don't think there's no such thing as a free lunch. You need to be willing to with restaurants. And that was the kind of the closing advice seemed to just echo this idea of relationship and consistency, is being able to partner with restaurants. And Linda gave this lovely little 3-point thing. You need to remember these 3. You need to focus on what you're good at. Know that are your best. Focus on those. And then before you approach a restaurant, understand that restaurant. Understand their aesthetic even, and see which one of your products may fit in there, because whether you like it outside of the bottle makes a massive difference. So you had focus, you had to understand, you had to partner. And then the other thing that Linda pointed out was that getting listed is only half the battle. Then staying listed is a completely different animal, and that can have to do with price, but more importantly, or probably more likely, it has to do with the sort of partnership you have and what kind of a partner you are to the restaurants with which you're working. And then John at the end said, look, once we've ticked price, quality, and supply, which are kind of bare basics for anyone trying to run a business, the next thing is, does your wine create an experience, and does your wine have a great story? And I think that is true to stand out anywhere, whether it's in retail, e-commerce, on-con. You need to know exactly what your product is trying to say. It might be through words on your website or through a sommelier, but the product itself needs to also speak that same story, or otherwise anything else you do is going to be seen as a gimmick or a fad. So that is my takeaway from today's conversation. Are there any last points that perhaps I could have touched on? No? Everybody happy?
I think that was brilliantly summed up, Jono. Well done.
Thank you, Matt. And thanks for joining us, even though you've been horribly ill. We appreciate your energy that you brought today. So thank you to all of you. I said we'd take 60 minutes, but we've taken 80 minutes. You guys have been supremely patient. Thank you. And to those at home, apologies for connection issues. And in the wake of this webinar, we don't want this 82 minutes to just be sparking thought or even talk. We want it to trigger action. So hopefully, if you can, as a producer watching, just pick one insight from the discussion and translate that into just one change in the next month. And it might be finding a way to make your product or your wine a better wine by the glass offering. It may be sharpening, your pitch deck. It might be just picking up the phone and calling that restaurateur that you've been avoiding for whatever reason. But whatever you decide to do, whatever that one action is, do it intentionally, write it down, plan it out, and see it through. And if you're not sure where to start on this thing, well, we've got a panel of people right here who I'm sure will be more than happy to give you a minute or two to steer you in the right direction. So thank you, everybody, for your time. To the panel, once more, thank you again. We hugely value your insights, and we hope that all of you have a wonderful, productive day further.